The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back talking baseball in the zone. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and it's kind of difficult for us today. Our teammate, friend, partner, companion, Ronnie Rabinovitz is deathly ill, and we are throwing out prayers, good vibes, whatever you got, and we are hoping for his recovery. That's the best we can say. We're all shocked, and in his honor, rather than just not having a show, I thought that we would talk about Jackie Robinson. As most of this audience knows, Ronnie has dedicated his life to carrying on the legacy of Jackie Robinson, educating people about Jackie Robinson, educating kids, talking to groups. Ronnie was, when he was a child, was literally Jackie Robinson's buddy. They were, because his father introduced them early on, his father was a real good friend of Jackie's and represented him, and Ronnie befriended him and has a lifetime worth of memories. They were friends for the remainder of Jackie's life, and we just like to talk about Jackie from our own personal standpoint as baseball fans, aficionados, and lovers of Ron. How about that? So I'm going to introduce the group of us who are here. Gene, the Yankee-hating machine, is here. Gene Hutmaker. Gene, how are you, sir?
I'm just fine.
Okay. Alan Blumkin is not here this morning, kind of a surprise. David Hubler is here. Good morning, David Hubler.
Good morning to you, and my best, of course, to Ron. And, let's talk Jackie today.
Yeah. George Case III, whose dad played in an era right before Jackie came up. And I'd like to start with George, and because you are a little older than me, I was born in 1946. Tell me a little bit about the transition, what it meant to baseball when Jackie crossed the line in 1947.
Well, I'd like to...
one thing, excuse me, George.
Yep.
Chad Rubin is here, too. Sorry, Chad.
No, it's okay.
I'm a little blumished today.
Blunched.
Fluxed. So go on, George, if you would, please.
Yeah, well, I would, and I do appreciate the fact that also I've had a nice chance to talk to Gene. I share some messages with Gene on Facebook. I'm not a Yankee hater like he is, but certainly know of that era. And I did want to mention about Jackie because it was, as you talked about, Ralph, the transition from what Major League Baseball had been prior to Jackie and to what it became. But the fact is, my dad retired in 47, just a couple weeks after Jackie broke in. Jackie broke in with the Dodgers in 47. My dad retired from injury in, I think it was August of 47. So my father, being a base stealer, Jackie was a great base runner, in addition to all his many other skills. So I always had an affinity, for Jackie and what he meant as a player. And the fact that he opened the door. And, a few weeks actually after Jackie broke in with the Dodgers, Larry Doby became the first African American to play in the American League. So that transition from what baseball had become prior to Jackie and what it has become today certainly was a milestone. And Jackie was a great athlete. Branch Rickey did the best he could to prepare Jackie for the abuses and the things that would happen to him being a pioneer, and Jackie had that ability to handle it and was a sensational major league player. And, I was happy to have a chance to meet Jackie's daughter, Sharon, several times, and we had a nice chance to talk about, our fathers both being, major league players, so it was a very enjoyable experience for me.
George, you have an affinity for sons and daughters of baseball players because you can relate to what it takes to be that.
Well, yeah, yes, it does, Ralph. And the one thing I'm glad you brought that up because Jackie playing in Brooklyn, he lived in the community, and my dad was the same way when he played. And it's not like today's players that are off on their palatial mansions and the millionaires. And back then, when Jackie played and when I played and my father played, it was different. You were part of the community, and I do have an affinity, and I have met some children, grandchildren. I know that Matt Dahlgren, who is Babe Dahlgren's grandson, he and I have had many conversations. So I certainly do have that affinity for, an offspring or a relation to a major league ball player.
Well, you're friendly with Mickey Vernon's children.
Well, yeah, Mickey did not have a son. He had a daughter, Gay, and Gay and I, Gay was the same age as my sister, so Gay and I have known each other for a long time, and certainly had a lot of conversations over the years. As a matter of fact, Gay had been a sportscaster up in Boston, and she had me on her show one time. So, again, that's an opportunity that I had, a special opportunity, because of the fact that, my dad was a player, and I had some contacts with those offspring of other players who played with or against my father.
George, before we get on, I'm trying to word this question. Baseball, before Jackie, the community of baseball is perceived as being predominantly Southern and somewhat cracker in their mentality towards African Americans, towards minorities, towards whatever it is. Cubans had a hard time. Manny Minoso, Pasquale, all these guys. Is that overblown? What? The players didn't resist integration as much as it was portrayed. Am I correct?
Well, I think you are, Ralph. I don't know for sure. All I do know for sure is that my dad never had a mean word to say about anybody, black or white. And the fact is that he knew a lot of players over the years, whether he played with them, against them, or coached with them or against them. The color of the skin made no difference to him. It was the ability of the person. Now, I know there have been a few racially, insensitive statements that have been made over the years. Ben Chapman was accused of being a racist when he was with the Phillies, and when Jackie came up. Whether that was a Hollywood version of it or whether it actually happened, I don't know. My dad and Ben Chapman were teammates with Washington in 1941. I never heard my dad ever say anything about Ben later on, after that incident, so I really can't say. But I have to think that it probably is overblown a little bit. A lot of the ball players were Southern, no question. But the fact is that the mentality of the country back then, if you look at segregation and all the things that went on for years and years and years, baseball was just a microcosm of what was happening in society. So,
I wonder, George, is baseball a microcosm of society, or is society a microcosm of baseball?
Well, Ralph, that's a good point. I mean, it could be either way. But the fact is that, back then, baseball certainly was white, although the Negro Leagues were flourishing. And we've talked about before, Clark Griffith, was Griffith Stadium, the Homestead Grays were a source of income. And for him, he could have signed Josh Gibson probably, and Cool Papa Bell and Buck Leonard, those great players. But if he did, he knew that the attendance for the Negro League Homestead Grays was going to drop off dramatically. And when Jackie, broke the color barrier, and then Dobie and Monty Irvin and a few of the other great players, a couple of years later, the Negro League ceased to exist.
And with that, the black press died as well across the country, because part of what they did and part of what was cover the industry of the Negro Leagues. And so there are a lot of blacks that look at that period of time as a negative period of time, ironically.
Well, yeah, you know what, and Ralph, it could be. I mean, you look at all the talk about the Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and all the things that have happened, but, baseball, had made the transition, and as far as I know, it was a rather smooth transition from when Jackie first started and the abuse that he took, maybe not so many from the players, but probably from a lot of fans. But it was a different world back then, and what Jackie did and what Dobie did, they opened the door, and it became a question of how much ability do you have, or do you have the ability to make the major leagues? Do you have the ability to sustain that career in the major leagues, or are you going to be like many players? You either flash in the pan or you never do make it. But it was based upon your ability and not the color of your skin.
Well, that took a long time to happen after Jackie. Vis-a-vis, Pumpsie Green didn't get called up to be the first black Boston Red Sox in a northern community, northeastern community, until 1959, 12 years after Jackie got called up.
That was the last team to integrate, actually.
Yeah,
Red Sox
and
absolutely.
Right, and as David mentions, and that's true. But on the other hand, you can look at the progressive teams like, the Dodgers. They had many African Americans. And
absolutely.
looking at where Gene Hutmaker will certainly attest to, the fact that it took until 1961 when the Yankees had their first African-American battery, when they had Elston Howard catching and Al Downing pitching.
Another Trenton, New Jersey guy. You'll bring that up.
I know. I always do, but I do it because Al and I are good friends, and I think he deserves that recognition. So.
And isn't that the beauty of it all? Because if you could all come in full circle, if a conversation can come in full circle like that. Right.
Let me just make a quick comment there, because in doing the research, I read a good number of Afro-American newspapers from Baltimore, Washington, Pittsburgh, Courier, things like that, and it's interesting. It was the black sports writers and columnists who did most of the agitating, if you want to use that sort of tainted word, for baseball integration. You never saw comments in their columns, or you never saw op-ed pieces by the black ball players themselves. Now, they may certainly have wanted to play in the major leagues, and I'm sure they did, but you didn't see the kind of, I won't call it anger, but frustration is a better word, frustration that built up over the years by the more prominent black journalists of the era for baseball integration.
Beautiful point. Beautiful point. May I ask Gene to comment on the slow integration of the Yankees and how Vic Power, later to be a Minnesota Twin, how he suffered and never did play Game 1 as a Yankee first baseman.
Well, you had to meet certain requirements to be a Yankee, and Vic Power definitely did not listen to the Yankees. Sort of maybe why Girardi got fired, but he was associating with white women, and they didn't like that. And one other thing is that Weiss did not want black fans to meet with the Connecticut Wall Streeters in the stands, figured that they might leave. So when they finally did get a black player, Elston Howard, he met their requirements. And
okay,
he was
now how did
tremendous player?
He met their requirements? They were both equal, I think, over a career. They were both equally skilled in different positions, but they had both had terrific careers. Are you meaning to say out loud that the Yankees were so shallow that they would cut their nose off to spite their face? Because I would say Vic Power was probably the best defensive first baseman in the American League in our time, our collective, everybody here, except for the young guy, Chad Rubin. Chad, how old are you? Chad? Pardon me?
I'm 46.
Okay, what are your memories of Jackie Robinson? What are your first memories of Jackie Robinson?
Actually, I don't have
the story. You weren't
memories.
obviously.
I have to tell you, when I met Ronnie for the first time, was really when I knew who Jackie Robinson was. I knew what he did, but in Ronnie's office and his home, he has all these things all over his walls and old newspaper articles, and I got to sit down one day and read a lot of it, and I really didn't realize how special Jackie Robinson really was because by the time I was old enough, there was African American players, there was Puerto Rican players, there were players from all over the world already playing, and it wasn't a big deal. So to read about Jackie is just a remarkable story. I mean, and then when you have teams like the Red Sox and the Yankees, who are, two of the most iconic franchises, not really wanting to integrate, it's an amazing story.
It is. What about Jackie's journey puts you in awe of the man?
Well, that he couldn't stay in the same hotels, or he couldn't eat with some of his teammates, or how some people treated him just because he was a human being. I don't understand that. And it was right after World War II where we had seen some of the worst atrocities man has ever committed to one another, and all this guy wanted to do was play baseball. And it's hard for someone of my age to understand why people acted the way they did. It's very, very difficult to me.
A footnote on that.
Yeah.
Boston was a notoriously segregated town. New York was not. So there is a difference in the reasoning behind their tardiness in bringing in their first Negro black ball player. And it showed in the fact that it was several years after the Yankees brought up Elston Howard that the Red Sox finally brought who was it?
Elijah Pumpsie Green.
Pumpsie Green, right. And one of the other interesting facets of that is, of course, we're talking Jackie Robinson, you can't forget the incredible boneheaded play by the Red Sox when Jackie Robinson tried out for Boston in 1945. No, the Sox didn't pay any attention to him at all.
Right.
You know something though? I know the Boston City has a reputation for racism and all that, and we even saw it this past year with Adam Jones, and there were the racist taunts toward him. But
that's right.
Yeah. That 10 years later had Bill Russell, and
how Boston treated Bill Russell as recounted in a few of his books, in a book called Long Balls, or I think it was Terry Pluto who wrote a couple of books about it, was absolutely disgraceful from the standpoint of humanity. And don't brush over the Adam Jones thing too quickly. This is year 2018, and
coming up.
That kind of stuff goes on is akin to the fact that it's off the subject a little bit, but I'll give you an analogy that you may not believe. That I read a headline: anti-Semitism in Germany is growing.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm thinking, growing? My God, what a level! If it came in at the level of a Holocaust, how much more can it be growing? For Christ's sake. So
the whole. Because I have to explain that for a second, though, only because my generation and my daughter's generation here in the United States, I have a hard time saying Negro leagues because I was taught that you don't call someone a Negro.
Right.
And that it's growing, in places like Germany or Boston or anywhere else with young people. It's scary. It's
very scary, and I think a lot of it has
teaching them that.
Simply, it all rises to the top. We get as leaders what is, I think Socrates said it, our leaders come from a representation of their constituents. I don't think he put it quite so crudely, but that's the way it is. And our blatant horrible way we treat each other as humans. I can't even think of the word I'm looking for.
Well, on a par with Socrates, Woody Allen said, the American people get the government they deserve. It's not the government I deserve.
No, that's actually a very good line. I mean, but when I was going back with Bill Russell was his impact on the game as a player. Forget anything socially. You would think that, and what Jackie had done and other black players had done, you'd think they'd want to set a talent standpoint to be equal to everyone else. That's where I was going with the Bill Russell stuff. I mean, I know he hated living in Boston and all that stuff, but talent-wise, he was the best player in the league at the time.
Well,
Chamberlain was in there at the same time. So
yeah, well, Fatan, Oscar Robinson, if you compare position by position, but let me tell you, just in terms of the ultimate team player who fit in and used his skills, and it didn't hurt that they had 12 All-Stars on the Celtics at that time. Guys coming off the bench was Sam Jones, stars like that, and Casey and Havlicek, and they were a terrific team. But yes, as far as the epitome of basketball, when you think of a team game, Bill Russell exemplified it. And you had crazies who would break into his house and defecate in his bed.
Yeah, I know. It's disgusting.
In Boston. So there really isn't an excuse, and you could say, well, that was a sign of the times, this, that, and the other thing. The Adam Jones thing, I don't remember this morning who brought that name to my head.
I did. I did.
Yeah, it's just still here, and if it's not overt, it's covert on Main Street, USA.
Yeah, the interesting thing is Adam Jones, of so many people, is a non-controversial person. I mean, he's just a darn good ball player. I don't see him taking a knee, so to speak. I don't, and for him to be the butt of this racism in Boston was incredible.
Well,
yeah,
but
Adam Jones,
the respect to his skills. Because part of racism is a jealousy. What could you say? Would that fan who's screaming epitaphs gladly change place with the billionaire that's playing center field, who's cheered wherever he goes. And I think fear and jealousy are the foundation of racism. And
I agree.
It was the Jews, it was the Irish, it was the Italians, it was whoever's lower on the totem pole that one group of people can go, well, at least, we're higher than this other group or whatever. And I think that's just a basic weakness in us as a society or a culture or whatever. It's fear. Fear motivates us more than anything on a negative basis. That's it from my standpoint.
Since I'm a little bit younger than you guys, what was it like in the 50s and 60s with racism and the ball players, and not just baseball, but in general around the country when you had the race riots, or you had the marches and Martin Luther King and all that? What was the feelings like?
Gina, I'll let your voice get heard a little bit.
Well, not only was there color racism, there was bigotry among the ethnic groups. Not being Irish or Italian, when I started in the post office in 1963, the Irish used to tell me horrible things about the Italians, and the Italians told me horrible things about the Irish. So it wasn't just a black and white thing. It was even ethnic. In a lot of the towns, I grew up in a basically Italian town, and my mother grew up in a town over, and that was mostly Polish. So they didn't even live amongst each other. It was all one group basically in one town. So you had it in one area, like Perth Amboy, New Jersey, Bloomfield, New Jersey. That was basically Polish. Belleville and Nutley was Italian, and they didn't like each other. And one thing that Sally Hemus, who I was good friends with at BAT dinners, was telling me, like, he wasn't racist, but he got charged with it because everybody called everybody the ethnic names back in the when he was coming up through the minors in the early 50s. So when he had problems with Gibson and Flood, he was saying it was nothing to do with racism. It was just the way he. Ethnic slur of that time. And even me as a kid growing up, it was used all the time in school. Ethnic slurs were part of the basic language, not just with blacks, because the blacks mostly lived in black areas. They're not in the regular United States like they are now in the suburbs and everything. They were basically in the cities and in the South. And I couldn't believe.
Well, the printed word for those ethnic slurs is different than the spoken word sometimes. It's just, for instance, when you use the word, any word in your communique, what's the expression like on your face? What's the tone of voice that you use it in? Knowing what you knew, Gene and David were a little older, and in the way it was back then, it's sometimes you're right. They were just words. What was behind the words was different, and I can just say that there's being Jewish. I've heard arguments for old people, the Litvaks or the Glitzianas. They'd fight amongst themselves. You want to hear racism? A light-skinned black, African-American, black person, Negro, back in the day I grew up, there was a lot of prejudice with darker-skinned black people calling lighter-skinned people Ofe. That was the expression. It's just a lighter skin. High yeller.
High yeller, absolutely.
A lot of fights would break out between blacks based on the color of their own skin. Who would...
Ralph, just a second. Let me interject, because Friday night, my wife and I went to Arena Stage, and we saw Nina Simone, For Women, play about the bombing of the church in Birmingham that killed those 4 little girls back in '63. And one of the 2 of the women, of the 4 women who were supposedly in the church, right after the bombing, get into this spat. I wouldn't call it a fight, a spat, because one of them is High Yeller, and they argue about the racism among their own race. So, I mean, it came to the fore Friday night, throughout the run of the play, of course. But so you're right. I mean, High Yeller was considered something else apart from the shades of black or brownness.
Right. And when I was a kid, it would always amaze me that the Irish would go to war over, if not war, for, battle over the difference between Christianity, Protestant and the Catholics. I understand it now, the working class, and that it wasn't so much the religion, it was the class thing. But I couldn't understand as a kid the absurdity of it all always fascinated me. So, but it's highlighted by race, creed, and religion. Let's put it that way. I'm thinking in 200 years, we're all going to be frickin' gray. And all this will be nonsense. We'll have all gotten together if we could avoid blowing each other up. I think what good is going to come out of this is that we will become literally one. We will, as a culture, become one. Hopefully. Guys agree, disagree?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just throwing it out.
God, I hope so.
Yeah.
Coming from New York, I had very little experience with racism at all. Until I went in 1957, my uncle, who was a traveling salesman, and his route included the Richmond, the Tidewater area of Virginia and Baltimore, took me on one of his trips, and we went to Jamestown. And they were celebrating the 350th anniversary of the founding of the Jamestown colony in, what would that be, 1607. I was thrilled to be on this exotic trip. But what really smacked me in the face, because this was the first time I had seen anything like this, were the segregated bathrooms and drinking fountains with the signs, colored only, white only. I'd never seen anything like that before. And to this day, I remember it so clearly. They're celebrating 350 years of progress? This is the end result of progress?
Wow. Well, every day with what's going on in the world, I just shake my head sometimes. I find myself listening to the news, watching the news, whatever, ingesting the news on the internet, and I just find myself just shaking my head like my grandmother used to do when she couldn't understand what the world was becoming, and that was back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't so smooth and easy in the 50s. You asked that question, Chad Rubin. We had the Cold War going on, and it was something else. You guys want to talk about that a little bit in terms of unrest, added to the social change of women's rights, and the disabled getting their rights, the schooling system. What was it like to suddenly have busing in New York? All of that stuff. We grew up in times of social change that no generation but ours has ever experienced. We've lived through it all. You guys who were lucky enough to have lived even longer than I have, you remember wartime. You literally remember, David Hubler, the times that you wrote about years later. When you did your research, were you surprised at some of the ways that you remembered things? How it wasn't just like how you remembered it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
something there.
Well, I'll tell you, I had another interesting.
Your childhood perceptions weren't as it really was.
Well, in that case, the trip to Jamestown, of course, certainly was that, and it sort of frightened me a bit, just being among that atmosphere. But it didn't. You talk about the 50s and 60s. I'll give you a classic example of how time has changed. 1961. I was covering, and Hal was there. Hal was. Hal Bach, the AP sports writer who's on Tuesdays and other time. I was writing sports as a young sports writer for the NYU paper. We had a great team. We had a team that wound up in the Final Four.
That's famous.
I remember that.
Yep, yeah. Sure. We went down to play Georgetown at McDonough Gym. Okay, the two stars of the team at that point were Barry Kramer, Jewish, and Harold Happy Hairston, black. We entered the arena, and so did a bunch of Georgetown students in robes and hoods, and some in Nazi uniforms. This is how we were greeted on the court at McDonough Gym. Think of Georgetown.
And Reiner was the point guard, another Jew boy.
Yeah, no, but that was he wasn't. I don't think he was there in '61. I think he came a little later. But the point was, this is how the crowd at McDonough Gym, Georgetown, Jesuit school, a highly rated school. This is how they were greeted in 1961. So you say, and now look at Georgetown. I mean, they haven't had a white coach in 35 years, maybe. Who knows? I don't keep track of it.
Right.
But I mean, things do change. Things do change for the better, even if it's very slowly.
Right. Well, I don't want to make light of the players that came in after Jackie, the Frank Robinsons, the Veda Pinsons, the Minnie Minosos and these guys, how they struggled as well. Some even more on some levels than Jackie, because Jackie, when he was signed, went to Montreal, which was an extremely race-tolerant city, and then came to Brooklyn, and not that what he went through in spring training and what have you, and getting to spring training, going across country, which Peter Golenbach's book, Bums, talks about. He interviewed Rachel Robinson, and what they went through was horrendous. But Hank Aaron, all these guys went through hell well into the 50s and 60s. Gibson and couldn't stay at the hotels. Frank White in St. Petersburg, in St. Louis, couldn't stay at the same hotels his teammates were staying in. And this is years after Jackie. So it is a crazy, messed up world. But David, what you say, change comes slowly. I am grateful for the change that has come, brought us to this point, but it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back type thing, and I'd like to see it be 3 steps forward, no steps back. That's because change can't come fast enough for me. That's all. Anybody want to elaborate on that? Anybody want to add anything to Jackie and your experiences and your memories with Jackie? Gene, anything?
Well, I saw that movie, Jackie Robinson, when he played himself back. I must have been like 8 years old when I saw it, and then I I realize how stupid people can be, especially white people.
Yeah. Well, it's not just limited to white people.
Well, I'm just saying, at that time when you're 8 years old, like, I go, wow, this guy, like, I had no idea.
Right.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Who was the first black player in New York that fans got behind?
Willie. Well, Jackie.
No, Jackie, of course. The Brooklyn fans were very pro Robinson. They loved the guy.
But not the Tank fans.
What's scary is that every baseball fan was pro Jackie, and secretly had to admire the Dodgers for it. You look at the partnership, if you will, that Pee Wee Reese, who greased the way for all of Jackie's accomplishments and acceptance, if not his accomplishments, around the league. He come and put his arm around Jackie when Jackie was taking a lot of heat from opposing players and what have you. Jackie had everybody's empathy, even if you were a Giant fan.
Well, that's true. That's very true. And the same thing was with Willie Mays. When Mays came up, I mean, the fans in New York took to him immediately. I don't think that question has much validity because Elston Howard too was greeted as among the Yankee pantheon of tremendous ball players.
Right.
So was it more of a media thing that they were trying to drive a wedge between everyone?
Well, may I speak to the media about that? In 1951, when Willie was called up, they ended up playing in the World Series against the Yankees. And I think it was the last game of the season when the playoffs, Don Mueller slid into third base and either broke his ankle or severely sprained it. And in the World Series, the Giants were forced to make adjustments. Mueller had been playing right, and they moved Hank Thompson to right field. And I don't remember who came in to play third base. It might have been Bobby Thompson was playing third base, which was incredible because Hank Thompson was playing right, a black man. Willie was playing center, a black man. And Monty Irvin was playing left, a black man. It marked the first time that there were three African Americans, Negroes, colored people, they were called in those days. But anyway, the first time in history in the World Series, the New York press, and I haven't been able to find the article, but they wrote some sort of what they called a D. Pardon me? Oh, anyway, it was this, and it had to do with a little poem that ended up three N-words playing in the same outfield. David, do you remember that?
No, I don't. I was just listening carefully because I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, well, it was a sign of the times. It was the way blacks were, and this is 51, 4 years after Jackie is called up. And I'll try to do some research and find that. I'll do my homework and I'll come back next week with post a link somewhere that can be found. Sign of the times, what these guys had to go through, it embarrasses me about humanity. But let me tell you something. Hank Greenberg, Al Rosen, whoa, we could talk about what they went through. I know there was a lot of prejudice between the Irish and the Italians, the McGraw era and what have you. We could talk about that too. We got a lot to talk about in future shows, but we'll try to keep it on more of an up note than this week. Wanted to honor Jackie on Ronnie's behalf And again, we're all thinking about his recovery, which if we just hope for it, I hope it happens. What can I tell you? Guys, anything to add before I close it? I hope I haven't left anybody out in this show. Haven't heard George Case's voice in a while. Are you just sitting back and listening? You want to add anything before we get off, George Case?
I don't really want to add anything. I just have really been interested in the whole discussion because it did happen, and talking about it when I was playing myself, and I can only tell you from a player's point of view, and I wasn't a major league player, but I was an athlete, that, when I played, I didn't even think. I can never remember ever thinking about the color of the skin of the person I was playing with or against. Some of my best friends, teammates were African American, and they were good friends. I thought nothing of it, and I have to think that the vast majority of Major League ball players and athletes felt the same way, whether it be NBA players, NFL players, Major League Baseball players, whatever. I personally think it was more whether it be the press or the fans that made more of the issue because it was part of what the society, but from a player's point of view, I really think it was minimal. I feel that most players, and I've stated before, you played, you thought about somebody with their ability as a player, not the color of their skin.
Well, I got to ask, it comes to mind Enos Slaughter, and in the past you've discussed his deliberate spiking, unintentional spiking. Does Enos Slaughter get a bad rep? Gene Hutmaker, I think he might have been your favorite player.
Jackie didn't play first base well, and he was on the base, and when he spiked him that was his out on it. But he was a cracker, so he's the only one that really knows. But I heard him being on one of the New York sports shows before he passed, saying that he didn't mean to do it because he was in the base pass, and we played hard in them days. And once Jackie was cleared after his 3 years, he went into the bases pretty hard himself and wasting Davey Williams when Magley wouldn't cover first. That's the way it was in them days.
Glad we're in the days we're in now, and hope that the days we're in now are better than the days we're in now. Let's put it that way. Here's to progress, gentlemen. I hope I haven't left any of you guys out, and you've all spoken your mind. Am I clear?
Just one note about Jackie. His rival in his rival All-Star in the American League back in the time, that person's grandson is now the manager of the Yankees.
Oh, Bob Boone. Tell me about that.
Ray Boone.
Ray Boone.
Ray Boone. Yes. You guys, little before I remember him being up, but he was on the downward spiral when I was old enough to follow ball. Can you tell me a little bit about him, and maybe David Hubler can talk about him too?
Well, Ray Boone led the league in RBIs in 1955.
Oh, really? Wow.
He was a rival All-Star in 54 when he was an American League All-Star. And Jackie was on the National League team.
Yeah. Do you think the hire is a good hire for the Yankees?
Well, he has the famous home run. That's the only thing. I'm not big on managers anyway, but Mules was probably the better choice. But
I agree with you. Because of the times we live in, someone who speaks multilingual, and I think Mullins is being touted for the groom for the next Giant manager job. So him not getting this job, I think they moved him to bench coach with the Giants from third base coach, and he's gotten a lot of good publicity lately. He'll be a manager someday.
The guy who was overlooked for the Yankee job was Willie Randolph. If you want to talk racism,
right.
Randolph has been dying for that job for years. He did manage. He managed the Mets, I believe, for a while, and was a bench coach for a number of years, and of course was a terrific second baseman over a long period of time with the Yankees. He was one of these players who came up with the Yankees and retired with the Yankees. So, he certainly.
And he was a New York guy. He's a Brooklyn guy.
Yeah, he's from Brooklyn. That's right. Yeah.
Right. So.
And he didn't even get an interview.
He wasn't even talked about as a candidate, which.
No, I don't think it was racism. It looks like it on the surface. There has to be another reason for that, because Willie Randolph is very well respected among Yankee fans and players whom he played with. So I don't think it's really a question of racism anymore. But it gives the appearance of such,
Okay. Hey, thanks, guys. It was a terrific show under the circumstances. And, again, we're rooting for Ronnie. This is the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Chad Rubin, Gene Hunmaker, David Hubler was here, and George Case III was here. I'm Ralph Tycho. I'm the weak link of it all on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We'll be back next week. We're talking baseball in the zone. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.